Destiny has exotics. A lot of exotics. But despite so much armor to choose from and more potential than ever, I still see Bungie encouraging the same old builds season to season. But in a game with so many options for build crafting, how can we really decide which exotics are worth our time? That's where I come in. Welcome back to Destiny Workshop, the show where I waste my time finding underrated builds so that you don't have to. Each episode, I'll be taking one niche exotic from each character class and trying to work them into a build that's both unique and, most importantly, fun. It's been a while since Bungie ruined build crafting, and a lot has changed in the sandbox. So to get this series started again, I thought it would be fun to revisit some old favourites alongside a brand new build using a recently reworked exotic that I don't think has been getting a lot of love lately. So without further ado, let's get started. In my first ever episode of Workshop, I took a look at the MK44 standardicides on Titan. While the episode itself focused on a Void build, I had previously shown off builds for both Solar and Arc as well. Out of the three, I noted that Arc was probably my least favourite due to the lack of synergy with the subclass, with Insurmountable Skullfort being a much better fit. And Solar was my preferred version of the build, with Void taking a very close second. For those unaware, all three of these builds revolved around chaining each subclass's strike melee, as the MK44s would return almost half of your melee energy on hit, as well as grant an overshield when sprinting with these melee abilities charged. Now, this build in particular relied heavily on the pre-Lightfall build crafting systems in order to generate the second half of the melee charge. So, when many of those mods were removed, the build was killed in the process. But with the changes to the armor and the new stat system, I wondered if it would be possible to recreate that build once again. So I got home from a long day at work, booted up Destiny, and equipped my MK44 standard. I forgot that they completely reworked this exotic to only work with Arc. I spent hours testing a few options, trying to recreate my Solar version of the build specifically. I tried Hallowfire Heart as a replacement, but it meant having to build up a super as fast as possible, which I then felt disencouraged from using. So I moved on to Hoyle with both Solar and Prismatic, but even in ideal circumstances, none of these builds could compete with the pre-worked MK44 standardicides. And then I remembered what this series is actually about. It's not about chasing a specific playstyle or forcing an exotic into something it's not, but rather to test the full potential of the armor and see what's possible. So, despite the rework taking it in a whole new direction, I went back to the MK44s. This rework removed the ability for this exotic to return melee energy, and instead doubled down on the overshield portion, now only working with the Juggernaut aspect on the Arc subclass, which provides a frontal shield when sprinting with full class ability energy. Any damage the shield blocks is converted into bolt charge, and the shield will consume all class energy when broken. While amplified, the shield can withstand significantly more damage. The MK44s upgrade this further by slowly granting stacks of bolt charge while Juggernaut is active, and increasing weapon ready speed. While amplified, it will grant a speed boost to any allies following behind you, allowing you to lead the charge into combat. Overall, this rework isn't terrible in concept, but it's a lot more niche than the exotic used to be. It feels like Bungie saw how underutilized both the standardicides and Juggernaut were, and tried to kill two birds with one stone. But the problem is, they turned this into a worse version of Storm's Keep, with the added trade-off that players are encouraged to run into danger. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, so let's break down the actual build so we can discuss what is and isn't working. Obviously, for our first aspect, we'll be running Juggernaut alongside Knockout as our second choice. When critically wounding an enemy or breaking their shield, Knockout will activate for 6 seconds, buffing our melee damage by 160%, restoring health on melee kills, and converting our standard punch into an arc-infused powered melee. For abilities, the only thing we really care about is making sure that we have the Seismic Strike melee. Our class ability doesn't matter, as we don't really want to be using it, and your grenade and super can simply be whatever you prefer. prefer. For fragments, Spark of Resistance will grant us additional protection when running into battle. Spark of Frequency improves our reload speed after landing a melee hit, but more importantly grants us a bonus stack of Bolt Charge from all sources while amplified, doubling the rate at which we can earn max stacks. The other two fragments can be your choice, but I went with Spark of Ions to generate an Ionic Trace when defeating enemies with Jolt or Bolt Charge, and Spark of Discharge to generate Ionic Traces with rapid weapon kills, and allowing Ionic Traces to grant Bolt Charge. Speaking of weapons, there's not really any requirements here. Monte Carlo can be a pretty good choice if you want to increase your melee regen, and Centrifuge is also a decent pick, as it pairs nicely with all the sprinting we'll be doing. That said though, any arc weapon fits into this build pretty seamlessly, and can help grant amplified and ionic traces more consistently. For armor, there's currently no set bonus that works directly with melee abilities, however the Aeon Renewal set from Kepler can grant speed booster after kills of explosive weapons, if you decide to run any. The Last Disciple set has a pretty great bonus for general content, so you can either mix and match these two or build into one set fully for the max bonus. Finally, moving on to mods, we want to build into as much of the melee stat as possible. The closer to 200 the better. After that, build for class, but make sure not to go over 100. Then I'd probably say health just to improve our survivability even further in high-end content. On our helmet, we'll be running hands-on to help with super regen, alongside your preference of Siphon and Ammo Finder mods. For arms, we want 1 to 2 melee kickstart mods to help us get our melee back faster, and heavy-handed to generate orbs of power on melee kills. For our chest, just pick whatever resist mods match the activity you're running. For legs, Absolution, Recuperation, and Better Already are all great choices. And lastly, for our class item, the choice is honestly yours. Most of these mods rely on our class ability, which is something we want to avoid using. So I'd probably just recommend your choice of finisher mod, alongside Proximity Ward and lastly Outreach, just in case we desperately need more melee energy. Overall, this build isn't terrible, and in the right circumstances it can even be really fun, but the flaws aren't so easy to ignore when the content and modifiers aren't working in your favour. This build relies on throwing yourself into danger, which can really hurt its viability in some high-end content. Seismic Strike does blind nearby enemies when landing a hit, which can stun an unstoppable champion or give you time to wind up the next hit. And the Frontal Shield can provide a decent amount of protection from projectiles, but if enemies have ways to slow you, like with Chill Touch or the Avalanche Bane, it can turn you into an easy target. Despite their recent adjustments over the last couple seasons, I think the MK44s and Juggernaut both need a bit of work. If it were down to me, I would simply add the Standardside's current benefits to Juggernaut by default, and then rework the exotic again, this time returning its ability to return melee energy alongside some other benefits. Back in the first episode of Workshop, I gave the Solar and Void version of my MK44 build an 8 out of 10. Whilst the Arc version only managed a 7 due to it not synergizing as well. And while I do find the build to flow into itself a bit better now, its negative aspects are more prevalent. So with all that in mind, I think once again the MK44s deserve a 7 out of 10. This next build is one I was very excited to try again. Back in the last episode of Workshop over 2 years ago, one exotic stood above the rest as my favourite. I said back then I would return to it, and now here we are. And better yet, it received a buff shortly after that episode. So let's take another look at Chromatic Fire and see how it's performing in the current sandbox. This exotic creates an explosion matching the damage type of your equipped super after scoring a precision final blow with any kinetic weapon. Combining this with Mindspun Invocation and the Shackle Grenade on Strand enhances this further, creating a suspending explosion on any final blows for 25 seconds. And with the buff made to Chromatic Fire, its explosion will also sever any enemies it hits, reducing enemy damage output by 40%. In addition to Mindspun and Shackle Nades, we'll also run the Weaver's Call aspect to release a swarm of Threadlings each time we activate our class ability. You could use the Wanderer instead, but the additional suspending explosions are rarely useful if you can keep your shackle grenades charged up. For fragments, Thread of Generation is an easy pick for improving grenade ability regen, alongside Thread of Continuity to upgrade the duration of Suspend, Sever, and Unravel, two of which will be applying pretty consistently with our grenade and melee. Thread of Warding is an easy choice to increase your survivability in high-end content, and lastly, throw on Thread of Wisdom to grant Orbs of Power when defeating suspended enemies. For weapons, the only one that really matters is our first slot. Make sure to run a kinetic weapon that can comfortably and reliably score precision final blows. New Land Beyond is a great pick, but if you really want to cause some chaos, any weapons with Firefly will be amazing. For your other slots, run whatever suits the activity best. Just like last time, this is a fairly versatile build. For armor, we mainly want to focus on the TechSec set. At 2 pieces, this will increase our kinetic damage against shields, vehicles, and constructs. And at 4 pieces, we can release a kinetic shockwave when breaking a shield or killing a powerful combatant with our kinetic weapon. For those keeping track, that's now up to 4 types of explosions per kinetic precision kill if using a Firefly weapon. For mods, we want to get our grenade and weapon stats as close to 100 as possible without going over. Grenade will make sure our recharge rate is as high as possible, and weapons will improve our reload speed alongside increasing our damage against minor and major enemies, massively improving our odds at landing a precision final blow in high difficulty activities. After that, it's all down to personal preference, though putting some stats into melee, class, and health can be pretty useful. For the rest of our mods, starting at the head, we'll go with Kinetic Siphon and an ammo finder of your choice. For the arms, we'll run Grenade Kickstart alongside Heavy-Handed and Impact Induction so that our melee can help generate energy on command. It's worth noting that Heavy-Handed has a 10-second cooldown at one mod, while Impact Induction has a 7-second cooldown. Usually this wouldn't be something I'd worry about, but with Strand Warlock having up to 3 melee charges, it's worth keeping in mind. Spreading out those charges might be a lot more valuable than using all 3 back-to-back. For chest, it's nothing exciting. Once again, just run whatever resistances best suit your activity. For legs, I ran Absolution for 5% energy towards all our abilities on each orb pickup, and Orbs of Restoration, which grants 10% energy to our least charged ability. Note that as long as our melee has 1 full charge, this mod will never provide it with energy, meaning we can direct more energy towards our class and grenade ability. Lastly, we'll put on Elemental Charge. Each time we grab an elemental pickup or destroy a tangle, we'll grant progress towards generating an armor charge. Tangles provide 50% progress, meaning we gain an armor charge every 2 tangles, alongside other pickups generated by our teammates. And finally, for our class item, I went with the timeless combination of Reaper, Powerful Attraction, and Bomber. This is a build that might take some practice to get used to, not because it requires too much skill, but more because it requires a very specific playstyle that favors certain activities and events. Obviously, the ease at which you can headshot enemies is a big factor in using this build, but positioning and, more importantly, add density are also really big factors. This build will be less useful to you if the activity you're playing does not give you enough space to pick off enemies at a distance, or does not have the add density required to get these chain reactions going. However, in those situations, especially battlegrounds, this build is a lot of fun. Thankfully, it hasn't changed too much since Lightfall, although if anything, I'd say the upgrade to Chromatic Fire does make it that tiny bit better. However, unfortunately, with the new and featured gear system, there are not currently any kinetic Firefly weapons available to use with it, which means any weapon you do decide to use, you will be putting yourself at a disadvantage in terms of damage. It's not too noticeable, especially in lower end content, but it is something to take into consideration. That said though, previously I gave this build an 8 out of 10, and after re-evaluating it in the new sandbox, I believe it is still worthy of that ranking. There is the possibility of me pushing it up a little bit higher, purely based on what kind of kinetic weapons we get access to in future seasons, but for now I'm going to leave it at a solid 8 out of 10. However, while working on this video, Bungie actually announced a rework for Chromatic Fire in the Ash and Iron update. And since this video was already pretty close to that point, I thought I might as well delay it a couple days so I could test it out for myself. Only for them to announce that they're probably going to revert the rework anyway. On the bright side, I do think the current rework is really good. They removed the subclass specific debuffs that the explosions could apply, meaning for our build, it will no longer cause sever, which is a pretty minor loss to be honest. It was more of a nice little bonus to the build, but nothing essential. The much bigger change is that precision kills now have a much larger detonation range, and non-precision kills will also make smaller detonations, and you can increase that size with elemental kills beforehand. This is pretty huge for this build, as it's going to make those detonations far more consistent regardless of what kinetic weapon you choose to use. This means you could technically run a grenade launcher or even a shotgun for this build, though I'd still recommend a precision weapon of some kind just to get those larger detonations. But yeah, this rework upped the amount of chain reactions that this build is capable of by a noticeable amount. If they decide to revert this change, it will still be an 8 out of 10. It's a very good build, but the rework itself gives it so much more versatility in a whole lot more content. And for that reason, I actually think this has to bump it up to a 9 out of 10. Fingers crossed they keep the change. I personally like it, and I think, to be honest, the only reason it's being reverted is because it got caught in the crossfire of some of the other changes. Finally, we move on to hunters, and immediately I was hit with a problem. This episode has been all about returning to builds I loved from past videos and seeing how well they perform in the modern landscape. But the problem is, despite being a hunter main, I don't really like any of the old hunter builds I've shared on the channel, with the exception to my newest build, which doesn't really count. So, instead of looking to the past, I decided to look at the present. A lot of exotics got reworked or buffed in the newest update, so I started looking there. And then I found it, Capo's Sting. In the past, I would have considered this exotic, for lack of a better term, complete dogshit. Its main gimmick was improving the smoke bomb's damage by 50%, as well as providing other minor buffs such as increased melee regen and granting the player true sight. The problem is that smoke bomb is not a melee designed for dealing damage or final blows. It's a support tool used to weaken and disorientate enemies, so trying to turn it into some kind of add clear melee really didn't work, especially in more difficult content. Thankfully, I actually really like the direction they took this rework in, as now Capo's Sting no longer buffs the smoke bomb damage, and instead greatly refunds melee energy upon killing a weakened enemy. And this can be a weaken from any source, meaning it synergizes really well with other void abilities and weapons. Killing a weakened enemy will also release a burst of weakening smoke from the target, very similar to the on the prowl aspect. Together, these changes basically turn you into the nader from Payday 3.
Don't worry, I'm a professional.
So let's look at the build, starting with our aspects. On the Prowl gives us both a way to weaken more targets and grant invisibility to us and our teammates. On top of this, killing targets marked by this aspect will buff our weapon reload, stability, and handling, as well as granting energy for our grenade, melee, and class ability. All of this plays into our next aspect, Stylish Executioner, which will turn us invisible and grant us true sight when defeating an enemy affected by any void debuff. On top of this, our unpowered melee will apply weaken when invisible, giving us yet another way to activate Capo's Sting. For our fragments, Echo of Harvest will generate both an Orb of Power and Void Breach when defeating weakened targets every 10 seconds. Echo of Starvation will grant us Devour when collecting either an Orb of Power or a Void Breach, and Echo of Persistence will increase the duration of all Void buffs, including Invisibility and Devour. If you're looking for even more ways to weaken, Echo of Undermining is a great choice alongside Echo of Remnants. Combining everything together with a Vortex Grenade will turn everything around you into a toxic hellscape for all enemies. And it doesn't end there, as we'll also run Deadfall as our super to spread even more weaken. And lastly, your choice of class ability, though I'd personally recommend Gambler's Dodge just to guarantee even more smoke bombs. This build can work with just about any weapon you'd like, but if you really want to take things as far as they can go, any weapon that applies weaken is a great choice. I spent a lot of time running third iteration, especially with its catalyst, as it becomes a weapon that can both weaken enemies and turn you invisible, which combos into our abilities really well. For our armor, just like our Titan build earlier, there aren't any armor sets that specifically benefit melee right now, so best to aim for using either the Bushido set for better survivability or the Last Disciple set for improved ammo generation. For stats, we want our melee to be at least 100. You can go over to increase the smoke bomb damage, but to be honest, the output is so low anyway that even at 200, the total DPS increase isn't really worth it. After that, focus grenade and class to keep our ability uptime as high as possible, and then whatever you like from there. For our mods, starting at the helmet, we'll run a Siphon mod matching our weapon, as the more orbs of power we have, the more we can keep Devour active. Alongside this, you can either run Dynamo for super energy or an ammo finder mod. For our arms, I'd recommend both impact induction and momentum transfer so that our melee and grenade feed into each other. And then your choice of firepower for even more orbs, or a grenade or melee font to boost either stat by 30 while you have an armor charge. For our chest, say it with me, the usual resistance mods. For our legs, we'll run Absolution for more ability energy on orb pickup, and Elemental Charge because just like the Warlock build, Void Breaches give us 50% each, meaning a guaranteed armor charge every 2 Void Breaches. And the last mod can be your choice out of any of the 1-cost mods. Recuperation and Better Already are great for survivability, but to be honest, Devour and Invis already does a great job at that. So you might prefer one that will grant ability energy if your respective stat is a little low. Finally, for our class item, we'll run Powerful Attraction and Reaper alongside Time Dilation, but you can swap this out for Bomber if you'd prefer. If it wasn't clear from the opening to this build, I'm a big fan. It's a fantastic kit that specializes in a more supportive / add clear centric playstyle that's a lot of fun to run inside a fire team. It's not a perfect workhorse build, and it can fall a little short in high-end solo content, but with a relatively simple and rewarding gameplay loop, it is really a lot of fun, and works especially well in content with higher ad densities like Battlegrounds, Onslaught, or seasonal modes like Savathun's Spire. With so much flexibility, survivability, and support ability, I think Khepri's Sting has finally found its place in the Destiny sandbox. And for that, I have to give it an 8 out of 10. This might be one of my new favorite builds, to be honest. And that's every build for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.